Welcome back, guys, to the 10-minute Bitcoin show. Gonna get you out of here before the next block. We're talking today. We're talking about some things that I think a lot of people don't want to say. And in some respect, I can understand. There's All right, look. Let me start with this. Bitcoin is open source, right? We talk about this all the time here on the 10-minute Bitcoin show. Bitcoin is open source. You cannot stop anybody from changing it. You cannot stop anybody from running whatever code they want. This is a permissionless system, right? This is one of this Bitcoin's biggest strengths. It's opt-in, it's permissionless, it's cash on the internet, hard to change, no auto updates, right? I mean, we have this distributed consensus, and this distributed consensus is very special because it's what gives our network value. It's why Bitcoin has any values, because of its network. The token itself, right? If you just had the token itself in a vacuum with a limited supply, but you didn't have the peer-to-peer Sybil resistant cash network, it would be totally irrelevant, right? It wouldn't matter at all. The only reason that this matters is because we have this Sybil resistant network where we all agree on a single source of truth. We all can agree that this is what the state of things are, and we can verify that nobody's cheating. Now, I view splitting the distributed consensus as highly undesirable. And I think in general, that's the approach that's taken by the likes of like Bitcoin Core in terms of how they activate consensus changes in the distributed consensus. We want to try to retain the distributed consensus. We don't want to fracture the distributed consensus. We want to try to grow the Bitcoin network. We don't want to split the Bitcoin network into multiple smaller competing money protocols. We want to do everything in our power to keep those in the distributed consensus, because networks grow in value as the number of participants in that network goes up, right? This is networking 101. So I classify splitting the distributed consensus intentionally as malicious. I classify this as a malicious attack. Now, I understand why some people take issue with that definition. It doesn't matter to me. You don't have to agree with me. The only thing that matters to me is that I'm clearly defining what I mean when I say that. What I mean when I say that splitting the distributed consensus is a malicious attack is that I mean that it is, in some respects, weakening the network. It's making it smaller. It's fracturing it. It's splintering it. And it's introducing security risk. Because you have a real risk when you're causing a contentious split in the distributed consensus. You have a real risk of there being reorgs. What are reorgs? Reorgs are when you have two different node clients enforcing two different rule sets. And it doesn't even have to be different rule sets, because this can happen under normal circumstances, but it's less rare. But let's say you have a small amount of hash power enforcing a different rule set, and they produce a block, and that block is viewed as invalid by the rest of the network, or vice versa. A little bit of time goes on, and you get what's called a reorg, where a different chain that doesn't include that block that the rest of the network doesn't agree with gets overwritten, and a transaction that was included in a block suddenly vanishes, and now that money is back in your wallet. That's what a reorg looks like. And that introduces double spend risk. And of course, like, as I said, where were we here? Okay. This is undesirable, right? And it isn't like this never happens. This does happen sometimes in Bitcoin. This is why, generally speaking, most exchanges will wait for 6 confirmations, because the more confirmations you have on top of your Bitcoin transaction, that's blocks that have come after your transaction has been included in a block, the more reasonably certain you can be that that transaction is not going to get undone. You have more deterministic settlement assurance the more transactions you have stacked on top of yours, that after you get to the point where there's about 6, you can reasonably conclude that you're not going to have any more, you're not going to have that transaction undone. This is why most exchanges wait for 6. 6 is like a pretty good number to reasonably conclude that you're not going to get reorged. But we've never really been in a situation, I don't know. These are open questions for me. What's the likelihood that we see, if we do have a contentious split here, if we do see a soft fork activation and it's a malicious soft fork, what's the likelihood that we see like sustained period of chain reorgs intentionally, right? Like just putting ourselves in the shoes of an adversarial actor. If you were a well-funded adversarial actor and your goal was to just disrupt Bitcoin, not to destroy it because you can't, but to just make it harder to use, to create more moral panic, to potentially, shake institutional faith in the trust of the protocol, especially if you're like affecting some technical thing that not everybody's going to understand the details too. Like most people, they don't know what a reorg is. They're not going to understand why their Bitcoin was sent 1 minute and then is now back in their wallet. No, like exchanges might be sophisticated enough to deal with that, but the average user is not. And Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer cash protocol, right? So even though exchanges can take steps to mitigate the effects of like a reorg attack, it's a security risk for the users, right? Especially the less sophisticated users who don't understand it. But lots more open questions there. Would those reorgs, if this attack happens, would those reorgs continue indefinitely? Unless somebody activated a rule change that basically excluded them from being able to do those reorgs. Is that even possible? Would that just turn into a cat and mouse game? Or would they split eventually, inevitably, without any other rule changes? I don't know exactly the answer there. Theoretically, if their intentions are pure, if the malicious actor like really believes in what they're doing and they're not just trying to disrupt BTC and its network, they would want to split off as soon as possible. Now, an interesting thing happens when a proof of work chain has a consensus split, because inevitably you end up with one side of that split that has what we would call minority hash power. And you really don't want to be the consensus chain in a proof of work peer-to-peer distributed consensus money protocol with a minority share of the hash power, because now you're putting yourself, your own chain, at risk of reorg attacks and 51% attacks. So pretty much I would say it would be in your best interest at that point to hard fork and change the proof of work algorithm. And I'm not saying that I think they should do that. My expectation is that if NOTS activates this soft fork, that they will be the minority proof of work chain. I don't expect that they will have the majority hash rate. I think that would be ridiculous. I don't think that that's going to happen. So I think that their best bet at that point is to change the proof of work algorithm. Now, I don't think you should do this. I think this is like a nuclear option. This is like the kind of thing that you do in a worst case scenario situation. Of course, you like I said earlier, you can't stop people from splitting the distributed consensus. You can't stop people from running whatever software that they want. You can't stop them from saying, we want a different reference maintainer. And I would be up for going down that road too, if I had reason to believe that like Core was no longer abiding by rough consensus and releasing like trustworthy software. But personally, like I haven't seen any indications that that is the case. So I don't see the reason of going nuclear. That's why I classify it as malicious, right? I think you would only want to split the distributed consensus if you had no other options, if you were at the point where the life and the longevity of the protocol demanded it. Of course, that's what guys like Luke are claiming. I don't agree with that characterization at all. But the question is, at what point do these reorgs stop happening, and do we go from messy reorgs to a consensus split? The delineation between those two is not clear to me. But what I do know is that in the past, Luke has suggested hard forks to quote unquote fix mining centralization in the form of proof of work algorithm changes. He did this with Bitcoin Classic, where this was his proposed solution to solving quote unquote mining centralization. You just change the proof of work algorithm and you brick all of the existing miners that are designed to mine for a particular algorithm. You can bring back GPU mining by this. Maybe this is going to be part of their plan. Maybe this is something that they're going to do. It's certainly something we've seen Luke suggest in the past. But in my opinion, we probably don't need to worry too much about a reorg attack. It's very expensive, and you can just wait for more confirmations. You can just wait for like 6 confirmations when you send a transaction peer-to-peer before you're sure it's settled, right? And you'll probably be fine. But we do need to think about these things. This could be coming down the pike.